Has any Redditor been kidnapped? If yes, what is your story? Almost, thankfully. I was 7 at the time. We were at the boardwalk in New Jersey when I got separated from my family. While I was looking for them, an older man came up and said my mom told him to come get me. Thankfully, there was a family of 4 walking by us at the time. My mom always taught me to, if I was lost, to find a family with children, because they're the most trustworthy option when you're lost in public as compared to an individual adult. I ran over and yelled mom, and I hugged her. I think her husband figured out what was going on and yelled at the guy, and he ran off. Dad put me on his shoulders and his 2 teenage kids went down the boardwalk yelling that they had found me. 5 minutes later, one of the kids got a hold of my mom and reunited us. One of the scariest things I've ever been through. My old teammate got kinda kidnapped. Nicest guy you'll ever meet. Told me a story about when he got kidnapped. Mind you, he was a 190-pound college athlete at the time. Essentially, he got carjacked and shoved in his own trunk. But the perpetrators just wanted to use his car for a joyride. So after a night of speeding, smoking blunts in his car, and doing whatever else, they got pulled over by the police. He said the looks on the cops was something else, thinking they were coming up on a routine traffic stop, only to find the driver owner was in the trunk of the car. I lived in Cambodia. I was at the local market with my then 2-year-old daughter. I turn around and she was gone. I was in a complete panic, rushing around searching for her. I had to pay to local police $200 to do their job. That's how it was back then. My daughter turned up in the border. The person who took her was trying to take her out of the country. The only reason she was noticed was because she had a distinctive yellow t-shirt on. This was 13 years ago. She wasn't traumatized by the event. Thankfully, she was too young to remember. The man who took her got sent to prison for 15 years. That's the last we heard of him. I was kidnapped when I was younger, but I didn't realize it at the time. My uncle and my aunt were going through a divorce, and he was staying at our house with my cousin. One day he said we were going on a trip. I was young, and I loved going on trips, so I didn't think anything of it. He took us from Connecticut to Minnesota, and we stayed there for a few days. What I didn't know was he was about to lose custody of my cousin, so he took us and ran. I think he also took me just because I was there and he didn't want to leave me home alone. He was arrested shortly afterwards, and sadly he killed himself in jail. I was almost kidnapped once. I was visiting the mall with some others and left alone to go to the bathroom, which was down a long isolated hallway. When I came out of the women's bathroom, a dirty old man rushed out of the men's and pinned me up against the wall. There was an emergency exit at the end of the hallway, and he was dragging me toward it when another dude came out of the bathroom. He was big and bald and looked like a biker, complete with vest. He yelled "Hey!" and the old man dropped me and ran. I was 15 at. Almost kidnapped in CA when I was 5. My cousins and I were playing in the front yard and 2 guys drove up. The passenger said, "Hey kids, wanna go for a ride?" He talked. The driver got out and approached us. All I remember now is the mix of confusion and fear and don't talk to strangers. Luckily my dad walked out to see what was going on and they took off. There were reports of 2 men in an 80s model Suburban that apparently kidnapped a 12-year-old girl down the street. That last part was something my mom always told me. But she also had a knack for lying to scare me straight into the arms of Jesus. So, who knows? One day my mom's boyfriend at the time asked me if I wanted to go to Grandma's house, his mom. I was about 7, and loved that lady and her nice house, so I said yes. After a quick visit, we went to the mountains where he asked me if I wanted to shoot guns. Oh hell yeah. He let a 7-year-old use an AR, not auto, and pistol with on-the-fly instruction. It blows my mind to think of it now. We get on the road home, and he's pulled over by CHP. He goes to jail for DUI and I go to juvenile hall while I wait for my mom. turns out they had been in a huge fight, and he took me without telling her, so she called in a kidnapping call. I was kidnapped as a child by my stepfather. Don't remember much of the details, I just remember being told that it was quite a big deal in my small town. I was only returned when my stepfather was given 100 KOST. Not me. My public speaking teacher was telling us how she had another class do a 5-minute speech on something important in their lives. Most were boring ass presentations, mostly hobbies or a weird vacation in Cuba. Then a guy finishes his presentation with, "And that's when the FBI showed up and rescued me, because the people vacationing with me were not, in fact, my family. They were drug dealers who'd kidnapped me from my home, smuggled me to Cuba, and were demanding $XM for my safe return." When I was like 10, a friend's mother abandoned me in another state while she kidnapped her own children. I was spending the weekend at a friend's house. The friend's mother had a manic episode and decided to leave her husband and move in with her recently deceased sister's widower. He lived in Vermont, we lived in Georgia. She packed us into the minivan at 5 a.m. and took off. Her two oldest children, 13 and 15, got pretty upset, so she left the three of us with an aunt in Pennsylvania. It was pretty terrifying for my parents. A friend of mine, not me. So my pal goes to Bolivia every year and always tries to convince us to come with him. We never do, because he casually mentions to bring kidnap money with us. Long story short, coke is dirt cheap in the rural area his family lives. A big round of drinks at certain bars will come with 2/3 grams of complimentary coke. And he loves the white stuff. Anyway, every year he goes he gets kidnapped. They treat him good, no harm, gets a semi-decent meal etc., and the ransom is like £150 or something equally irrelevant. Apparently they once accepted £50 for his release. Was almost kidnapped when I was about 2.5. Went on a family vacation to Germany, quite a bold move with a 2-year-old in my opinion. My mom told me we were at a train station waiting and she noticed a man obviously pretending to have a heart attack. My mom leaned over to warn my aunt that she knew he was faking it as a distraction and to watch her purse. While she did that though, a lady walked by and just picked me up. My mom grabbed me back and the lady tried to tell her it was okay and was trying to take me back, but obviously my mom kept telling her no. We found out later that this was relatively common at the train station, as it was easy for them to grab a kid, jump on a train, and quickly be in a different country. Not me, my sister, didn't get her, but sure they were up to something. I think I was about 6 or 7 when two guys in a white van pulled up outside our house. Me and my sister were riding our scooters up and down out front. My sister was about 4 at the time and they'd pulled up next to her. I remember hearing them say, "Do you want some sweeties?" and watching her walk straight up to the van. Literally threw the scooter down, ran over, grabbed her and started shouting really loudly, "This man is a stranger," while attempting to drag her back in. She was screaming and crying because she wanted the sweets. The guys sat there until my dad came out the front door. I don't know if they were hoping she'd get away from me and run to them, and that's why they stayed that extra minute or so while I was screaming. They dangled the bag out of the window to tempt her. It was a white van and Werther's Originals, so the typical stereotype dirty old man tools. My mum was beside herself once she found out, super wary after that. Was around 4 years old and playing by myself in our apartment's playground area. A man pulled up in his car and beckoned me over to him. Once I got there he kinda gestured for me to come closer to his window and then asked me what time it was. Me trying to help him out turned around quickly and ran to my apartment to ask my mother what time it was. She, confused because her 4-year-old suddenly inquires about time in general, asks why. I tell her the man in his pajamas outside wants to know. She rushes outside and said man speeds off. I'm older now and realize he was not in pajamas, he was in boxer shorts. Early 90s, Morristown, New Jersey. I was younger than 5. My dad was really irresponsible, and he let me play in the park while he went to a music store, at least, that's where he said he was going, but he didn't come back with anything. He left me there for a really long time. I vaguely remember getting into a grey van, and there were two adult people, I think it was two guys, and they were dirty and the van had a lot of garbage in it. They drove me around for a few minutes, talking quietly to each other, seemed really nervous, and then they dropped me off again exactly where they'd picked me up at the park. When I told my father what happened, he got angry at me and told me not to tell anyone. That's all I remember. Not me, but my dad. He was in high school and was selling his car. One morning before school, two men came to the door and asked if they could test drive it, as they were interested in purchasing. My dad agreed and joined them in his pajamas. They pulled out of the driveway and just kept driving. They drive through the country and eventually stop off at a gas station on the side of the road to sell some glass bottles for gas money. You may be wondering why he didn't just get out at this point. At some point, my dad had turned around and looked at the guy on the back. He was holding a knife and munching on a cigar. He wasn't trying to get on that guy's bad side. Anyway, my grandma had panicked at this point and had phoned the police. They eventually intercepted the three of them in the middle of nowhere. When asked if he was afraid, Dad always says, "No. I was out of school for the whole day." A doctor I work with, and his wife, was kidnapped by a fugitive who was wanted for killing a few people already. They came across a guy who seemed to be injured on the side of the road and, true to his helpful self, stopped to offer aid. He pistol-whipped them, then kidnapped them in their own vehicle, took them over 300 miles across a few states, and then the doctor pulled a pistol that was hidden in the door compartment when the killer was distracted and shot him 4 times. The guy ran for it, but was captured a short time later. Here's an article about the killer and the kidnapping with all of the insanity pretty neatly laid out. As a baby I was kidnapped in Greece. Back in the late 80s my parents were sitting down for dinner at a restaurant with a glass front. My dad was trying to calm me down outside and dinner arrived. Old Greek lady was like, "Hey, I can look after him, I'm not going anywhere." My dad figured the table was literally the other side of a glass plane. "Okay, thanks." Dad walks in, Mum asks where I am, he turns to point and she'd gone. My dad goes one way, his mate goes the other. The mate caught her going into a house to show her friends. I was blue-eyed and blonde-haired, much like Ben Needham. Almost, although I didn't realize it until way later. My parents both worked a lot and so I had a nanny basically to pick me up from school. One day she didn't show, but some dude I'd never seen before did and was asking around trying to find me, saying that she'd been injured and sent him to take me home. I'd never seen him before, and he had no idea who he was looking for. 100% sure in retrospect that I'd have been kidnapped if I'd gone with him. This is probably too late for anyone to see, but I was kidnapped when I was 5 from a flea market in Arizona. We hopped around the country to 13 different states over the course of a year and a half. Always with private investigators and police hot on our trail. I was finally found due to an anonymous tip, and 2 off-duty cops who decided to check it out, in a trailer park in Missouri. I was returned to my family Christmas Eve 1991. My kidnapper was finally caught 5 years later and is serving 2 consecutive life sentences. I was kidnapped by my babysitter when I was probably 4 or 5. She took me, without my parents' permission, to a Christian revival complete with people getting dunked in a river and a tent where people were going nuts. Not me directly, but a friend of mine was kidnapped some years ago in her hometown in Brazil. According to her, the kidnappers were extremely polite and tried to keep her as comfortable as possible given the situation. She suffers from asthma and had a mild attack during the event, and the kidnappers went back to her place to pick up her inhaler before taking her to wherever they held her. In the end they just went to ATMs and maxed her cards out before releasing her. When I was 5, I was in a grocery store with my mother. She was looking at something and I was right behind her when a man picked me up and started walking out of the store. He got to the door where a clerk stopped him and asked if I was his child. He set me down and ran out of the store. The clerk quietly walked me back to my mom when she turned around and asked me where I had wandered off. The clerk never said anything and I never told my mom until years later as an adult. As I write this, I can still feel the confusion in mind of what was going on and processing why this strange man had picked me up. I can still see the haunted look of desperation and lust in his eyes. I didn't know what I was seeing at the time, but I've come to realize that had the clerk not acted, I would be dead or worse.